Imagine booking a flight from Kenya to Nigeria, only to find out it's actually cheaper to fly all the way to the UK first, then back down to Africa. In 2023, a direct flight from Nairobi to Lagos averaged $800, while a Nairobi-London-Lagos itinerary cost just $600 on some airlines. Sounds absurd, right? But for millions of Africans, it has been a frustrating reality for years, and we often wonder, why does flying within Africa cost so much more than flying out of it? Why similar distances in Europe or Asia come with a fraction of the fees, and who's really pocketing the difference? These sky-high costs are a real billion-dollar barrier and are quietly shaping who gets to move, who gets to trade, and how an entire continent is held back. This episode will bring clarity on the real price Africans are paying for the right to fly and the interesting world behind it. So, you need to fly to Lagos for a business meeting. Naturally, you expect a quick, direct flight between two of Africa's biggest cities. But as you search for tickets, you stumble onto something bizarre. It seems like prices to fly within Africa are higher than everywhere else. Let's put this in perspective. Why don't we compare two routes, both around 1,000 kilometers apart? A flight from Libreville to Bangui and back to Libreville. Both are African capitals. On average, this journey will take you 5 hours to land in Bangui and more than 24 hours along with multiple connections on your way back to Libreville. All of this for more than $1,000. Now take Paris to Madrid, two European capitals. This journey will take on average 2 hours, mostly direct flights, and will cost you under $200, more than 5 times less, for the same distance. Wait, you might think, sure, but Bangui and Libreville aren't exactly major cities. Fair enough, so let's scale up. Nairobi to Johannesburg, that will likely cost you $600 for roughly 3,000 kilometers. Meanwhile, London to Athens, the same distance, under $300, that's half the price. And the pattern repeats across the continent. But why is this happening? At the core of the issue is a tangled web of taxes, fees, and surcharges baked into every African airline ticket. On average, African passengers pay more than double in taxes and fees compared to Europeans. For example, the average international departure tax in Africa is $66, compared to just $30 in Europe and $32 in the Middle East. In Western and Central Africa, international passenger charges average nearly 3 times that at $94. Even connecting flights cost more, $36 in Africa versus $17 in Europe. Arrival taxes are higher too. We pay $12 in Africa, but $8 in Europe. African travelers face over 200 different types of fees and taxes. On top of these, airlines must pay landing fees, parking charges, navigation charges, and more. And these costs are inevitably passed on to passengers. Now, here is the engine behind it. Many African governments treat air travel as a quick revenue source. This leads to a cycle of overtaxation. And without economies of scale, local national carriers can't afford to lower their prices. The result is a continent where mobility is a privilege, not a right, and where the promise of economic integration remains out of reach. But here on this channel, we're focused on the money side of things. So, how did we get here, and where does all this money go? In the wake of independence during the 1960s, African nations all rushed to launch their own national airlines. These flag carriers were less about practical mobility and more about projecting national pride. Governments funneled money into these national airlines, shielding them with rigid regulations and monopolistic rights. The belief was that a strong national carrier would connect the country to the world, generate revenue, and symbolize modernity. But here's the catch. Most airlines prioritize routes to European capitals. It turns out that the strong incentives of the colonial air agreements were still in place. These were known as bilateral air transport agreements, treaties that favored former colonial ties over regional cooperation. Often modeled after European systems, they limited competition and prioritized profitable intercontinental routes over the development of intra-African regional routes. Inevitably, these protectionist policies bred high fares, poor service, and financially unsustainable airlines. Now, let's follow the money. Aviation in Africa quickly became a juicy revenue stream. Governments saw air travel as a luxury, as something to tax heavily. And much of the revenue from aviation taxes doesn't return to the industry. It disappears into national treasuries. In South Africa, for example, air passenger taxes go directly to the National Revenue Fund, not to airport improvements. But this isn't unique to Africa. It is quite common actually, and easily justifiable when your flag carrier is doing well and your airports are in good standing. But you need just a quick look at our dedicated airline playlist to see that almost all of them are struggling. So Africa is charging double the fees for poor service and poor infrastructures. In Senegal, passengers flying to or from Dakar pay high infrastructure development charges around $65. In Cameroon, passengers pay an airport development charge, and in Egypt a development tax of 25% is collected on the ticket. We pay hefty airport development fees, security charges and more. Yet, despite the fees, many African airports feel frozen in time, under-equipped, outdated and inefficient. The money vanishes, like it usually do. Inside the industry, frustration is boiling over. Airline executives and experts argue that these excessive taxes and fees are crippling. Most Africans simply can't afford to fly, and the market remains tiny compared to the continent's population. Many industry studies affirm that if governments reduced these taxes, ticket prices could drop between $100 to $200, unlocking a huge new demand. But as it stands, high charges keep fares artificially high, stifle competition, making it impossible for low-cost carriers to enter the market. So, Africa gets stuck with limited routes, sparingly served destinations, and a sector that struggles to grow. Meanwhile, Europe and Asia rewrote the playbook, slashing taxes, opening skies, and igniting competition. In the European Union, liberalization led to a 34% drop in discount fares, a boom in new routes, and the rise of low-cost carriers. In Asia, the entry of budget airlines like Air Asia expanded markets by over 37%. These changes made air travel affordable and accessible, driving economic growth, tourism, and trade. So, who actually wins in this broken system? Not the airlines, not the passengers, not even the broader economy. The real winners are government treasuries and whoever have access to them. Africa is home to nearly 18% of the world's population, yet it accounts for less than 2% of global air travel. But this wasn't the future African leaders envisioned. In 1999, they signed the Yamoussoukro Decision, promising to open the continent's skies and create a single competitive air transport market, where airlines could freely operate across borders, boosting connectivity, lowering fares, and driving economic growth for the continent. But more than 2 decades later, the promise remains largely unfulfilled. Many governments still see their national airlines as symbols of sovereignty and economic pride. They restrict access to their markets, fearing competition will hurt their flag carriers. Instead of open competition, most countries cling to restrictive bilateral agreements, controlling who flies where and how often. But not every country is stuck in this cycle. Rwanda and Ethiopia have taken bold steps to change the game, and the results are dramatic. Ethiopian Airlines, now Africa's largest and most profitable carrier, grew by embracing more liberal air service agreements. On routes where competition was allowed, passengers saw fares drop by up to 21%, and flight frequencies jump by more than a third. The economic impact is huge. According to a 2023 analysis by the African Civil Aviation Commission, the successful implementation of air liberalization in Ethiopia is expected to result in $81 million in GDP, with additional gains from tourism and more than 21,000 total new jobs. Rwanda has seen the same benefits. By improving connectivity through its national carrier and opening new routes, tourism revenues soared and visitor numbers nearly tripled in just 2 years. On liberalized routes, fares have fallen sharply, sometimes by 60%, making air travel accessible to more people. At last, all hope is not lost. The African Airlines Association is pushing governments to cut taxes and open markets. And the Economic Community of West African States has committed to lowering air travel taxes to make flying more affordable. Ethiopian Airline, of course, is leading the charge with its multi-hub strategy and various partnerships, going from east to west and north to south of the continent. In the end, the real price Africans pay for air travel is condensed in a recurring sentence we are all used to hear: And sometimes we even say it. So much potential. But it stays just that. Potential. Become a Wasaso Associates on Patreon. It's free. You'll get various perks and privileges like voting on episode, accessing sources for each video, and getting credit as a producer. I want you to be part of the channel's story.